One look at the result from the Australian Grand Prix and you might be forgiven for thinking this was an easy win for Max Verstappen. The race, however, delivered absolutely everything. Chaos, confusion and 3 red flags. But are F1 putting show business before the sport? Who were the winners and who were the losers from the madness in Melbourne? This is the Sky Sports F1 podcast. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode. Alongside me for this one, fresh off the plane from Melbourne. Well, not quite fresh, you landed yesterday,
Pretty
didn't
fresh.
Pretty fresh. Ted Kravitz.
Hello.
Hello. And
Matthew.
F1 content creator and YouTuber Tommo. Hello.
Thanks for having me. I feel bad complaining about the one night getting up early because you lot were on it from Wednesday night?
From Wednesday.
Adjusting your sleeping patterns,
Well,
and
it
obviously
was
you were
2
out
nights,
there.
Tommo. You got up for qualifying as well.
Of course, yeah, but I was in bed.
Okay.
So
not actually getting up.
I wasn't actually creating content,
yeah.
so, you know.
Oh, well, don't feel bad. We're happy to have you along. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Good to have you both here. I want to start by doing our one-word race reviews. One word to describe the race. Ted, after you.
Well, I thought about gravel, seeing as I had to say. Gravel?
Yeah, go on.
It should be said in that way. Gravel.
Gravel.
But I've decided not to go there because it was fair enough. I'm going to go with red. Am I allowed to steal red?
Yeah, that's
You can
fine.
take reds.
Not
You can
red,
take reds.
yeah.
That's fine.
Because flying back
fine.
from Australia, from Melbourne, as I did yesterday, I looked down, and if it was in the daytime, I would have seen the red centre. It wasn't. It was at night, so I couldn't see anything. But if there had been light, I would have seen the iron ore-rich red earth of Australia. They like to call a lot of things they have over there red. We also had Red Bull. Not quite dominating the weekend in the way that they have, in that they didn't get a 1-2 for the first time this season, but they did win. And we'll talk about the traps, the bear traps or the possum traps, or the Tasmanian devil traps, or the other marsupials.
Yeah, other marsupials
Koalas,
are
don't
available.
call them bears, they're not bears. Traps that Max Verstappen managed to avoid. So it is, Red Bull, but obviously red flags.
Yeah.
That's why I'm going with red. Oh, and I'm going with red because I've got a little friend for you, Matthew.
Oh, go on.
I've got a little friend for you,
Here we
Matthew.
go.
Straight off the plane in my
You're
red,
making me nervous.
in my red Japanese bag. I've got a little friend. He's little red.
Oh,
there you go.
Cute.
For those of you
he's lost
listening,
hang on, he's lost his hat.
Ted has just produced a
hang on.
kangaroo with a... Now, what do you call the smaller kangaroo, the baby kangaroo?
Joey.
Joey. That's the
Come
one.
on.
Sorry.
Baker, what are you
He
talking
can
about?
present a podcast. He doesn't know what a kangaroo's
I
little
knew,
kid
I
is
knew
called.
it was something important. Joey.
Hang on, his hat's come up. Look, I've got my little hat.
Oh, with the holes in the top
With
as well for the ears.
with the holes for the ears.
Beautiful.
And the fly repellents.
Brilliant.
The little Australian hat for you.
Oh,
So there you go, Matthew.
Wow.
They're beautiful creatures, although kangaroos can be quite intimidating.
Yeah.
Like in person. Some of them can be like 6-7 foot, built,
Really?
stacked. Yeah.
Much experience with
I went
confronting kangaroos?
I went travelling a few years ago, and we pulled over to this stop overnight, and you look out the back window, see all these cute little joeys,
Yeah.
and then these two they're the enforcers, like the big kangaroos, to keep them safe.
Okay.
My wife was like, "Oh, can I go and stroke it?" I'm like, "You won't come back alive."
There you go.
There we go.
Camera 3 got it. There you go. There with his typical Australian hat, Matthew.
Lovely.
Is my present to you.
Do
There's
I get
red.
to keep it? Wow.
Well, it is a present
It's a
for you.
gift.
To be friend of the
Well,
friend of the
at least until-
podcast.
Till the podcast's over.
Till after
Yeah.
we wrap.
Anyway, there's Red the kangaroo for you, straight off the plane from Melbourne.
Kevin the kangaroo.
No, Red.
Sorry, Red the
That's
kangaroo.
why I've
Right,
sorry, you weren't following me. So Red Bull, red flag, and my little mate Red. Oh, Red Earth.
Red Earth,
and Red the kangaroo.
kangaroo.
There you go.
Thank you
And
so
his-
much.
And his little Joey.
Lovely. That is a really lovely gift. Tommo, what have you bought for me?
My presents.
Yeah.
I think that's enough of a gift, Matt.
And
surely.
your one-word race review.
Which is chaos. Ties in kind of with yours, Ted, in terms of red flags, but in terms of all the shenanigans that went down, particularly on that final safety car. And how, I guess there's a conversation there, how much of it is, are we sending these cars standing start out late? You've got a lot of drivers scrapping for position. How much of that responsibility is, I guess, on the drivers as well? There's a lot of complaints of, cold tyres and all that, but these are 20 of the best motorsport racing drivers in the world. And for me, you drive appropriately to the tyres and the car that's underneath you. So difficult. We saw a lot of, 8 cars didn't finish that race.
8 DNFs from the race.
Mad.
Yeah.
I think Chaos is quite
Slightly confused. Chaos is apt. Slightly confused that they did classify some of them. So you're right, 8 didn't finish.
True.
But then I went through the timing and I saw, hang on, what, Magnussen's 15th?
Yeah, Ocon and Gasly were classified as well, weren't they?
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Those cars were in no state to be classified.
Mine, similar to yours being Chaos, mine is Crikey.
Crikey.
With the amount of DNFs we had, with the red flags, with the 3 red flags, with the fire for Russell, Magnussen's tyre, or Magnussen hitting the wall, and the big crash for Ocon and Gasly. I thought, you know what? A lot of people in the crowd would have said, Crikey. Crikey.
They would. It's true.
Yeah.
Very apt.
In my head anyway, I wasn't there. But anyway. All right, let's sort of get on to our big question for today. And I think the key one that a lot of fans are asking, particularly after having 3 red flags, is, and this is from Matt on Twitter, is F1 now putting entertainment over sports in order to put on a show rather than a motor race? What do you think the consensus is?
Just getting out my notes.
Yes.
So I wasn't aware of this being a storyline. In fact, I'm looking to see whether I had any of this kind of post. And I try to, when I'm doing post-race, sort of see what the zeitgeist is, what's the feeling around the place, what's going to be the kind of the Monday line or the Tuesday line as we are here.
Yeah.
And I didn't really expect it to be, were there too many red flags? And what about, starting this? What's the alternative? What's the premise behind the question of what? We should have carried on with safety cars, or there shouldn't have been standing starts, there should have been rolling starts? Or
I think both of those questions. And I think the desire to have a red flag, particularly we can look at the first red flag of Albon's crash. You've obviously got a huge amount of gravel all over the track. But I think the point is, you could have, in theory, obviously, because behind a safety car, you slow all the cars down when they go through that part of the track, right? So you would have slowed all the cars down. Surely that would have meant the danger of being in that area was mitigated. You wouldn't need to put on a red flag. Is it fair to put in a red flag at that point?
Because there's so many factors. You've got the cherry picker, which didn't need to go on the circuit, but was in the gravel itself. You've got all of the gravel on track, and you had the big sweeper machine that came out. And it's one of them, like, I think Alex's crash, the immediate eye test watching anyway, you think, oh, they can probably clean that up because, damage to the barrier seemed pretty minimal. But then you've not just got gravel on track. There's probably bits of carbon fibre because Alex hit the wall, fairly hard. But it was a glancing blow, so it didn't cause. There's certain crashes we see at a track like Saudi, for example. If you go straight on at turn 22, that's a pretty obvious red flag straight away because that's a touch point for crashes quite consistently. Yeah. You need to repair the Tech Pro. I think it's one of them that, the immediate eye test for, I think, particularly Alex and Kevin's crashes wasn't immediately, oh, that's definitely a red flag. And I guess it's a balance because I think Fernando and Max both mentioned post-race that they were somewhat confused about, the deployment of a red flag.
The first one.
Yeah, well, at least possibly
and the second one,
Magnussen's as well.
Yeah.
Right. And Magnussen's was a sketchy one because you had a bit of debris go over the fence as well and
actually
cut
hit
a fan in the arm as well, which obviously that's a bit of a freak accident that I don't think you can do too much about. But yeah, I guess it's one of them that the use of a red flag, dial down to what is actually the point of a red flag. Is it purely a safety thing, or is it being used to artificially create these standing restarts, which do more often than not, give drama, particularly towards the end of a race. We saw what Azerbaijan last season with 21 with the brake magic for Lewis. That was a race that had kind of petered out a little bit, and then you had this really exciting finish. And so, are they artificially inserting that? I think that's where the fan sentiment.
So the second or the third is where were they thinking maybe almost the third, even though the third red flag never was going to enable another lap's racing. It was always a pointless one, hence why I asked the question in the commentary.
Why?
Why are we doing... Given that this is the order in which the Australian Grand Prix is going to finish, why are we restarting this? And then Crofty said, well, you don't know what's going to happen. And I basically got shouted down by Crofty and Karun and Jensen, who said it was ridiculous to say that. Well, and they were right, in that after, about 10 seconds after I said that, then Carlos Sainz had his penalty. And so that wasn't the order. He was going to shuffle down the order. But, I don't think anybody expected, not least Carlos Sainz, or George Russell that red flag number 1 for gravel was going to be a red flag. Now, this is always something the strategists have in their mind. They think, okay, right, there's an accident. Is this going to be a safety car? Yes, it's probably going to be a safety car. Or is it going to be a red flag and we shouldn't come into the pits because we're going to get that free pit stop underneath the safety car? And I think on balance, the reason the likes of Verstappen, Hamilton, the McLarens didn't pit under that first gravel, or rather Albon incident, not red flag for gravel, is not because they didn't think not because they thought there was going to be a red flag, was because it was too early in the stint to put them on the hard tyre to go to the end of the race,
right.
which would have been marginal. It was a nice tyre, the hard tyre, but it required a lot of managing, and it was difficult to get it to the end from lap 9. Well, okay, they might have thought, all right, maybe we can have another VSC or something. We can get off it, go on to another medium or something like that. But I think that was more their thinking, which is why only Sainz and Russell actually did it. But I can understand what people are thinking in terms of, are we sure we're going to do this just because, and is it based on previous events? But I don't actually. I think on this case, there were sound reasons for red flag, certainly red flag number 2 and 3, that there was a lot of stuff that needed an awful lot of clearing up. And metal, both from the Alpine carnage and the Magnussen tyre wheel rim, it was wheel rim debris, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't just the carbon fibre, it was metal on the track.
Right rear wheel
Yeah.
disintegrated.
So that can be dangerous. Metal. Carbon fibre, a bit of gravel, you could argue maybe in the past we haven't needed red flags for that. But lots of metal on the track, I think. Probably.
And I think the drivers are divided somewhat. I know Lewis was mentioned after Kevin hit the wall. He said there was a lot of debris.
Yeah,
on
it
track.
came on the radio, didn't he? Almost quite pointedly.
Yeah, and I guess obviously it's in the driver's best interest to push for something that is going to benefit them. However, I don't think in that instance. I think also there's just probably differences in opinion and differences to what extent. So for example, the Albon one at the start, there was quite a bit of time between the incident and the red flag dropping. I mean, the cherry picker was pretty much already on the car when the red flag came down. So, what extra information was required from the race director? What did they need to then make that decision? Why couldn't that decision have been made sooner? Maybe it could have. Maybe it couldn't have. And that's where obviously George missed out. But even in hindsight, George was like, the team made the right call. Even though he missed out, he was, which I thought was, quite impressive and quite unusual for the driver to actually be like, what, I'm happy with that call. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Yeah.
So go back to that question. Can you read it again?
Question from Matt on Twitter. Is F1 now putting entertainment over sports in order to put on a show rather than a motor race?
Because, when you think about that, now we've actually done that. We are entertainment and sport.
Very much so.
I don't
but there's a balance,
a fine line,
right?
The answer to Matt's question on Twitter might be yes, but I don't think it's necessarily referring. I think, if we really sat down and thought about it, we could think about some other things, crazy qualifying formats we've had in the past.
Yeah.
Which never worked, but were meant to be more entertainment for sporting. Yeah, we might have done, but not this one.
Well, sport is entertaining, isn't it?
Hopefully.
Not quite sure why we're here. That's why we care. That's why we watch it.
If we're doing it right.
No, and it is a fine line. It is a very fine line. You've got the integrity of the sport, and
there you go.
You get a lot of you get a lot of there's another word when you're kind of again artificially creating drama in a sporting context.
WWE, for example.
Yeah. I mean, I used to think that was real when I was a kid. No, I think how stupid I was.
The drivers were quite interesting to listen to on this because obviously we had Verstappen, who has got a huge advantage when he's out in front. Obviously, a red flag for him is a disaster. Having the ability to change tyres, everyone coming out and then being able to race him, essentially, it is a disaster for him. Suboptimal disaster, maybe not.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. All right. But my point is he's built up the lead. So all that work he's put in has now been rendered, useless.
Yeah.
Norris, this is what he had to say. He said, "We come all the way to Australia, but it's such hard work to drive 55 laps perfectly. And because they try to put on a show, you just get unlucky and everything can get taken away from you all of a sudden. So I just think that side of it, I just think it needs a small rethink."
Hang on. This is Lando Norris, who finished a very, very creditable P6.
Yeah.
And didn't seem... Was he going to be higher up with any kind of... this?
Without the red flags,
He
no.
did all right with
Yeah,
this.
he
didn't
did. He very much was on the right side of it
McLaren
this
had
week.
a clean
They
weekend.
had a very
both of
clean,
them.
good weekend.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because Lando's. I think he was advocating for a rolling start as well. I think I saw additionally in that quote, he's talking about potentially doing a rolling start instead of. This is one of the things I've kind of seen people talking about online is, having a standing start right at the end. Is that too risky versus a rolling start, which is probably more of an equitable. It gives less opportunity for over, because obviously a standing start is going to give you more of a change to make up position. Look, Yuki Tsunoda. He shot through.
He had an incredible
He had a
start,
worldie
didn't
off
he?
the start. It was fantastic. Which
Yeah.
I mean, I love Yuki, so I was super happy for him. And then obviously him and Nico went back, both having had good starts. But I think there's a question around that, and it's tyre change. There's pros and cons. There's no perfect solution. This is the thing. There's no perfectly even equitable solution. You look at other motorsports, NASCAR, IndyCar. When NASCAR adds laps, IndyCar allows everyone to. I think before you can. On a safety car, before you can change tyres, you have to wait for the field to kind of bunch up so that you can't gain an advantage somewhat. There's no perfect solution. We've got a solution now where, again, if you pit just before a red flag, you miss out massively. And, you've got these standing restarts, and like you said, drivers might take each other up. But again, I feel like there's a responsibility on the drivers, no? Like, that they have to understand the car that's underneath them, and they don't have as much tyre. I know it was hard to get tyre temperature in Australia, but I'm not an F1 driver. But I don't know. I just feel like you drive the car that's underneath you, and if you don't have the tyre temp, you have to drive accordingly.
And yes, Lando's bosses are the ones who said, let's do the standing starts again. They've agreed to all of these in the F1 Commission meetings. So, if he doesn't like it, and if there is a move from the drivers to think, this is too much of a risk, I don't know what coming all the way to Australia has to do with it. This could happen in Silverstone. I travelled 12 miles down the road, and all of this has to
Been in traffic for 2 hours.
In traffic for 2 hours, and but that's what we have. I'm not sure whether that's been communicated particularly effectively to the fans. Do we all know? There was some sort of question. It's like, okay, right, it's a standing start. Is there a rolling start after reflag? Well, there can be. When does that happen then? When we think, we can't trust them to start on a start line from the lights off again.
Is that when it's like in wet conditions?
Is it?
Sometimes
The fact that we're not even sure when on a red flag restart, when it does come behind the safety car or a rolling start, the safety car goes off and they all start themselves, and when it's a standing start. Maybe that's the
I think on
confusion, is that we don't all know, it's a red flag. Right, what that means is that there will definitely be a start on the grid again after.
I think one of the issues for me after the second red flag was the delay in time of not knowing what was about to happen. Tweet here from Freeman. There needs to be greater transparency regarding red flag safety car decisions. At the moment, it's confusing because decisions made are opaque. This leads to a suspicion, rightly or wrongly, that the procedure is being abused to improve the show, especially if it's late in the race.
No, it's not being abused to improve the show. It's being open to sporting managers from teams to lobby, and then open the FIA up to protests, which I think is still going on as we're recording. Haas have appealed, I believe, the turning down of their protest, and they might withdraw it. But they are exactly the same as, who was it, Freeman, thinking, well, hang on, how did we arrive? What kind of metric have we said that we're not going to use the timing information that had the two Aston Martins out and Nico Hülkenberg in P4? There was timing information. I had it. I've got it on my phone. It was on the app. So they passed some beams.
Yeah, mini sectors or something.
Registering an order.
Yeah.
So why are we not relying on that? And why are we relying on the grid before with the Astons still in the race? So he's got, it's got the teams are questioning that as well because it's not hard and fast.
We had Otmar Safnauer on the pit wall, the Alpine team principal. I think Crofty asked him, "What do you expect to happen?" He didn't know. So, we as broadcasters don't know.
They were all waiting.
They don't know from the teams. And this, the audience at home don't know. And also, another point is, what about the people in the stands? Surely the people in the stands at the other part of the circuit are wondering, how much information do they get? They can obviously see the screen, they can see the feed, but they don't have there's not one system that's telling everyone what is going on.
Yeah, again, transparency is the key thing, right? I mean, exactly what you said, Ted. Why can't that, you've got this gap where nothing's happening, nothing's being communicated. You're saying it gives time for team principals to lobby and all that. Well, tell us that, communicate that. At least we know, okay, what are we waiting for? It's when it's, again, it adds to that whole, I think because I feel like so often, particularly in the last kind of few years, there's been a lot of press around the FIA, how the sport's been managed, safety cars, all this. When there isn't that transparency, when there isn't that clarity, it does make people speculate. And again, it's why can't, I'd rather a decision be made, like you take time, but make the right decision than rush and make the wrong one. I'm all for that. I don't mind if it's going to, take 10 minutes. Tell us why. That's all we want to know. We just want to understand why as fans, so that then it just adds to the speculation mill because nothing's going on. And then exactly what you said, it just adds to this whole, are they going to...
So the first thing the crowd knew about it, because I had one of the big screens that all the crowd saw, was when the FIA graphic came up and said order will be 1:44,
which is so unclear
14.
to a crowd. Trying to work out what the numbers are.
What are you saying?
Well,
do you not know the numbers?
Matthew,
by heart?
I know the numbers.
Excuse me,
but I think would it not
Formula
be more...
One has the most learned, intelligent
Absolutely.
fans who
I'm
all
just
know the
saying,
numbers.
would it not be
Yes.
better for the
Yes,
graphics to at least say
To
the
say-
driver's names?
Yeah, all right.
Fair
We-
enough.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. But can I say
A few Aussie beers to the
what
wind as well.
a,
You might want
That's true.
the
That's
names.
true.
What a blinder Aston Martin have played. In the last two races, they've managed to get two sporting decisions go their way. Yes, no, the jack didn't touch the rear crash structure. Okay, it did, but if it did, then it wasn't working on the car. Went their way. And let's start from the grid. Just ignore the fact that our cars spun, and even though they may have passed some kind of timing,
Yeah.
they're playing a blinder, haven't they?
Yeah.
I mean, people call it luck. There's no luck about it.
Yeah.
Fernando wasn't lucky. Aston absolutely playing a blinder on getting these decisions.
And again, I
go
think
their
that just
way.
added to the confusion, right? Where you've got the orders being taken back, yet Carlos Sainz's incident is still being penalised. And it's just one of them things where, I'm not saying it's right or wrong
Yes.
either way. It's just the
That's
confusion, right?
Yeah, because
you're counting some
what
things
you're
but not
saying,
others.
that's right. What you're saying, maybe science thought about this, is that never happened. You're putting the Astons back in,
Yeah.
like what happened with Sainz never happened. Yet you're penalising Sainz for the thing that happened, but didn't happen because the Astons are still there and there's no foul. So if there's no harm, Sainz is thinking, well, there's no harm to Fernando, then there's no foul on me.
Which is understandable.
Yeah.
I get, because all of Yuki's great work that he did moving through the field, Nico up to P4, which could have been a podium.
Would have been a podium.
Which would have been his first.
First,
All of that. And again, I'm not saying because I think, in my opinion, that Sainz penalty was fair. That's my take on it. But as an incident in itself, however, whether that should have, you step back some things, but then not that. And I think that there's understandably, again, it just adds to this confusion. And it's just a lack of clarity from fans. And look, this is the most complicated sport arguably in the world. I think to write down every potential eventuality in these regulations is going to be incredibly difficult. And it's just taking these instances. This was a chaotic race towards the end. It was a madness, and it all came from Kevin Magnussen's incident. And it's like, what can we learn? How can we improve this going forward? How can we just make it clearer to people watching? Because especially when you've got new fans coming in, it's, you get to an end of a race, and we saw it with Fernando getting his podium taken away, but then returned. And it's just like, we shouldn't have. I don't want this every race. No one wants this.
Well,
Especially,
it's two in two, isn't it?
It just makes the sport more intimidating, I think, to watch.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what's going? If I don't understand, if I go to bed and then wake up and then my driver's had it taken away, but then it's confusing.
Ted,
Should I pick up on Tommo?
Go on. I can see you were itching to pick up on.
Can I be Carlos Sainz?
Can I just read you what he said?
Yes, go on then.
After
Was this the
feel
point
for him.
Was this
He
the
was
point at
so
which-
sad.
He was
so
in
upset.
tears. You listened to the
was distraught, man.
team radio drivers at the end of the race.
Yeah.
From
There's
F1.
more. There's more of it.
He was he was crying.
Really?
On the radio after the race. You can hear it. Sorry, go on.
This is what I was going to say. This is what he said after the race. That it's the biggest disgrace I've seen in the sport for many years. It's the most unfair penalty I've ever seen in my life or his life.
Strong words from Carlos.
Strong words from
there.
Carlos. And Ted,
I mean,
you think it wasn't a fair penalty. And
No.
and we should emphasise the reason why it's potentially not a fair penalty is because if you apply
Well,
a 5 second...
fair is the wrong word.
Fair,
Appropriate.
yeah, why it's a stronger penalty is because
harsh.
under a safety car, obviously the 5 seconds that you get, because you're all bunched up as cars, it means that 5 seconds actually equals like 10 or 12
entirely,
places compared within a normal race where you might have 5 seconds might be only the difference between 1 or 2 spots.
Well, no, but they can't. Hang on, but they can't take into account the effect of the penalty.
Of course they can't. Of course they can't.
Otherwise, that will confuse everything.
Yeah.
No, I think Sainz's point was it was lap 1 where there's always a little bit more leniency, and if you penalise me for that, then you have to penalise Lance Stroll for taking out my teammate, even though it wasn't really Lance's fault, but he's saying it wasn't really my fault. And you have to penalise Pierre Gasly for taking out Esteban Ocon, which wasn't really either of their fault because it was a racing incident, because Gasly came on, didn't see Ocon, etc., etc. That's Sainz's point, was that there is a fundamental inconsistency. I think he's putting it quite strongly, but he was emotional. You can understand why. And crucially, they didn't listen to what he had to say. And he wanted them to be able to go to the stewards, explain what was going on, to hear from Fernando, and then, do that. But yeah, it would have depended if Sainz was still in it and if it was a happy Fernando. Because if it was a happy Fernando was still on the podium and Carlos had gone in P4, then I think Fernando said, well, I see your point and maybe there's no harm there particularly. If they had decided to do the Hulkenberg favouring podium restarting order for red flag 3, still with us everybody, then you would have still had the angry Fernando,
yeah, of course,
who would have sunk Sainz and said, absolutely, he deserves a penalty, given the penalty. So that was why he was so...
We're forgetting the most egregious one, which is when Sargent took out De Vries.
Which kind of just went under the radar.
That was like, I'm sorry, if you're going to penalise Carlos,
it was late. The stewards, they wanted to go
they had a flight,
Well, they didn't, but no, it has seemed to be gone completely.
And again, I understand that. Like, if Carlos is, I get it, because why isn't that being punished? Like, for sure, that one, the Gasly Ocon one. Gasly's gone off track, and I still think he's responsible, but I think there's more nuance to that one. Logan's, brakes later. He's not got the brake performance that he thought he would, and he's quite significantly hit De Vries up the backside, and he's not got a penalty for it. So again, consistency is so often consistency. We want consistency in this sport, and it's like, I get it, it's a difficult sport to manage. Of course it is. It's the most complicated sport in the world, again. But consistency. That's all. I think that's all we're, as fans and the drivers and everyone watching, is asking for.
Ted, just try and take us through the process that happens here.
Yeah.
In terms of, we've got a race director, Niels Wittich, by himself this year. He's not joined by anyone else.
Yep.
How does this happen? How are these decisions made?
So sometimes, let's say there is the Verstappen-Hamilton, something on track where nobody goes off, but there is a call in there. And Verstappen went onto the radio and said, "Did you see Lewis push me off? I was ahead at the thing." And they say, "We're on it." So what they do, they'll get on the radio and they'll say to the race director, "What did you think?" And the race director will offer an opinion. He'll say, "Well, I think that was fine," or he'll say, "I'm going to put it to the stewards." And then he will say that there's a driver leaves track to gain position and gains position. The race director, if that happens, will then go back to the other team and say, "I'm going to put this to the stewards unless you choose to reverse the positions and give the guy behind the place back." Now, that was do you remember the offer? That's fine. That's always been done. And the race director can offer to a team and can say, "Look, if you want to reverse the thing of your own accord, then please do that. Then it won't go to the stewards. It'll be resolved and we can carry on." The team then will think, okay, we're probably going to lose less if we do that than if we wait for the stewards' decision, who's going to give us a 5-second penalty and drop more places.
I remember that. It's like an episode of Deal or No Deal.
Yeah, but that's always happened. It's just that we heard more of it.
And it's resolved there and then.
It's there and then,
and
quite clean.
Going forward,
doesn't have to go to the stewards.
It's the fair result. It's what
and
it is,
so other things, so with these incidents that we're talking about, the race director prompted by a team, or the team asks questions, which is all they're allowed to do, the race director now. Niels Wittich will say, "Yes, I think that's worth the stewards looking at it." We'll go to the stewards and say, "Okay, I'd like you to look at this, and then they'll do it. So it's quite a quick decision for Carlos Sainz for them to do. Although no, I guess they had the red flag stoppage, didn't they? They had that to do it because the stewards need to be able to look at all kind of the angles, every angle, and review telemetry and GPS traces if they want to. So that's the process they go to.
And you can't. Sorry, I was going to say you can't pause F1 unless there's a red flag. It's not like you can just hit the pause button, make a decision.
Yeah.
Say unlike football where you just pause the game, go right, let's have a look at it all, make a decision, go on from there. In F1, it is. It's moving.
Yeah, it's not like a drop ball situation.
No, it's not.
Because I just wonder that, you've got all these different angles of looking at it, and I don't know. It felt to me like what's the difference when we say lap one? Drivers are given a bit more leniency.
Yeah.
Yet you can still get a penalty.
Yeah.
So, what is the understanding of that? Like, when they say leniency, is that still just up to human interpretation? Because what made them make that call on Carlos? It was a lap one incident.
I think it was that unlike with Lance and Charles, it was just the two cars there, and one was turning in and one went off, and they judged, if I remember the script, the steward's decision correctly, was that Carlos did not make enough of a attempt to avoid the collision,
right? And
he had space on his inside that he could have gone into, but kind of didn't. Was already going through the corner. Fernando went off there, whereas Lance was in the middle. Charles was coming in from the side, and then Lance didn't really have anywhere to go because Fernando was there as well. So I think that's where the leniency comes in, is that they understand there are going to be more cars on track together on the first lap than in something like that. Do you know what I like? I think Lance missed a trick here on the final. Let's see how many people we can get to benefit from Carlos Sainz's red penalty. Wouldn't it have been really sneaky if Lance had dropped back to 4.8 seconds behind Carlos to have made sure that he was the only one that would have benefited from the 5 seconds? But if Lance was feeling particularly naughty, he could have, which he isn't, he could have dropped back to 4.9. Can you imagine? And then all those people behind him would have said, Lance, we didn't get any points.
What are you playing at?
What are you playing at? Go right behind him so we can get some points. He was like, well, it's my prerogative. I can do that.
That restart at the end, and I know you mentioned it earlier, it was strange to have this formality of them going out behind the safety car.
Yeah.
For no...
Well, you say that Hulkenberg had issues.
Yeah.
He almost didn't make it.
Yeah.
He really actually came really close to not making it, which would have been a huge, because 6 points on the board for
So
Haas.
I guess, that does kind of prove the point.
And I guess it's like you've got to get... It's like... You've got to get your car around under its own, which obviously why the Alpines couldn't, because they were destroyed.
To go back to your point as well about sporting integrity, you've got to have a car that can finish the 58 laps of the race.
Well, look, and again, this is another thing that we know this was talked about, I think it was last season or maybe 21, that there's this kind of unwritten rule that there's always going to be this attempt to try and finish the race in green flag conditions, which on the face of it, no one wants to see... Maybe Lawrence Stroll because the Aston Martin safety car, great exposure for that. But no one wants to see a race finish under safety car.
Monza last year was so disappointing behind the safety car. It almost felt like we were robbed of a race, really, at the end.
And again, I think the argument was like, you had the cherry picker on the track for Daniel's car. And look, I just think it's one of them things that I think more, from what I've seen anyway, I think more old school motorsport fans are more open to seeing a race finish under a safety car.
Yes.
However, even I've been watching this sport my entire life. Like, when there was this prospect of this 2-lap sprint and maybe another lap right at the end, just on its own. Well, of course, I want to see that from an entertainment point of view more, but at the expense of sport and integrity. That's where this conversation is. Yeah. That's where there's this balance.
I think it is. I mean, they stuck to the rules, and that's what happens. It would have been stranger to argue just to say the race will not resume, which is one of the options that I think I said on air that they could do. They could say, but that's it.
And it was over 75% at this point, so it would have been full points.
They could do that. Yeah. It would have been a bit odd, and you would have then the stewards and the race director would have been open to teams saying, well, hang on, why did you say this? To which the answer of the race director was being, well, you lads can't really, keep it together and not cannon into each other. So I thought, you've had your lot. It's time to call it a day.
Well, Esteban said this after. He was like, the drivers have to take responsibility, I think, for a lot of the shunts that happened. But also, like, I know in NASCAR they add laps. Now, obviously, we have limited fuel. You can't refuel during a race. But I don't know, is that a solution? If you've got a red flag within, I don't know, so far, like, towards the end of a race, can you, like, top everyone up with a bit of fuel and
add a couple of laps?
I don't know. Like, there's no perfect scenario. There's no perfect way of doing it. But again, I think it's important to talk about this and have these conversations and understand from a driver's point of view, a team point of view, they've got their own vested interest, but also the product has to work for us, because if the fans aren't there, then the sport doesn't exist.
I don't mind it. I mean, I'm a bit of an older. I'm older than you, Whipplesnapper. If one race a year finishes under safety car, I haven't got a problem with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. Do people need to have that photograph of the guy crossing the line? And is that like an important thing? Or, you
mean for sponsors? Or
I don't know.
for,
Or just for Formula One?
Yeah.
Do you need to have... Does it get in the way if the safety car's kind of there, but then the safety car goes off and the guy just goes slowly? You need to have a person waving the checkered flag rather than just...
Is it any different to someone winning by 20 seconds? Like, is the excitement any different? Because, when someone dominates, wins a race by 20 seconds, and then there's a 10-second gap between second and third, for example, like, is that any more or less exciting than finish under a safety car? It's probably about equal, right? Yeah. I think it's when there's an incident towards the end, there is this kind of, what's going to happen now? Like, you're going to bunch the field up, you're going to potentially get some overtakes, and it's that potential excitement, I think, that then as fans we get carried away with. And
you can't deny the standing starts were exciting.
Of course.
I mean,
because we didn't know whether Red Bull had some sort of issue. They'd lost out on the first start.
Yes, of
quite
course.
considerably to George
Russell
Russell.
had a fantastic
great
start.
And you think,
Verstappen
hello.
struggled.
Is this? That was quite interesting for me. Is this a weakness of this all-conquering Red Bull, that actually on this day in history, are they not getting great starts? And if there's another one, is that going to be the bear trap that I spoke about at the beginning, where Max Verstappen doesn't come through and exorcise the demons of Melbourne? And that's why actually I felt it was such a crucial win for Verstappen. Maybe I should do asking a question that you're about to ask later. That he avoided all of these things. He avoided all the restarts. Maybe Red Bull doesn't have a great car off the line. He avoided all the red flags. He avoided all of that. And actually, that was as much of an achievement as his wins by 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Is that there were lots of things out there to trip him up and to make the tantalising Melbourne win that's been denied him for so long actually achievable. And there was relief you could sense from Red Bull after that they'd done it. That they came to Melbourne to win that race. Do you remember I spoke to Max on Thursday, and I said, if I was to offer you second now, would you take it? And he was like, no way. I am here. I've had terrible luck here. I've had DNF, so the best of my finish has been third. I want that win. And he was between laps 9 and 50, whatever it was, 50, he was going to get that win, no problem. But then at the end, there were the little gremlins coming out to steal the win away from him. But, all credit to Max, because he managed to avoid all of them to win. That's why I think it was such a crucial win for him.
And not even for Max, like, Red Bull hadn't won this.
Red Bull hadn't won
2011.
Yeah, 2011, yeah.
So,
as Christian Horner said on the radio afterwards. Do you think he has the Statman's list of statistics?
Do you think he gets the email?
To let people in on a production thing. Yeah. We have a stat man who sends an email just before five laps before the end of the race.
Yeah, nice.
Saying this will be, sorry to give away Crofty's. I'm sure he has it all in his head. This will be their first Red Bull's first win since 2011. This order is the most champions we've had in a top 3 or whatever. But then Christian's always ready with a little stat, isn't he, on the radio afterwards? Maybe he's giving him a line to say in the interviews afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that's Red Bull's first win in 2011.
Since we're on Red Bull, let's just talk about their weekend and their pace, because obviously Perez had, let's call it a shocker on Saturday. It was not a good day for him. However, I do wonder, with all the madness and the chaos that we've just gone through with the red flags, did that hide the fact that Verstappen was actually still super fast? And I mean, there was a point where he was 2 seconds after he overtook Hamilton. By the end of the lap, he was 2 seconds in front of him.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's Max didn't have to take big risks at the start. I think depending on the context of the season, Max didn't fight Lewis making that move up the inside as hard as probably would have in the past, because he knew he had the car underneath him to make the way, and you don't need to take those risks. Like it'd be silly to made that pass, and obviously opening up 2 seconds in a sector on the face of it. Now, again, I'm not sure how quick Lewis was in that second sector as well. I think Lewis went a bit slower in that sector, so that maybe amplified how big that, but that's still a huge. I mean, the way that Red Bull shifts with DRS Open is unreal. It looks like a Formula 2 car.
Yeah,
it's crazy. And again, like you got to say credit to Red Bull for developing such a package, because you look through the rest of the field, everyone scored a point now as well in the constructors. We're 3 races in. In terms of the rest of the field, I think there is a degree of kind of parity there when you look at the gap between P2 and P10. But Red Bull are just on an absolute worldie at the minute, aren't they?
And what's fascinating for me is that we now have, with Max Verstappen with a championship to think about, a complete flip of the Mercedes Lewis Hamilton seasons from 2014 to 2021. When Hamilton's been going for the championship, he knows he's got the fastest car. He needs to play it safe. And you've got the upstart Max Verstappen challenging him and wanting to get in there, and it's completely flipped, hasn't it? So now you've got the upstart Lewis Hamilton challenging Max Verstappen, saying, "I'm not going to take, no cares given. I'm out there to take all the risks," as Hamilton says. And putting it on, the championship defender Max Verstappen. So, I've got to think about my championship here, And you've got Lewis Hamilton. It's so weird. It's funny, isn't it, that we've got that. Hamilton knows he's not going to win the championship this year, not unless something really weird happens. So he can go in there, be aggressive with Verstappen, and know that Verstappen's probably going to have to give way, which is exactly what happened 21, 20, 21, something like that.
Also, with the Perez point, are we going to look back on this weekend? I mean, he's now 15 points ahead of Perez in the championship. And I know, look, we're 3 races down of a 20-race season, of a 23-race season, but this was the weekend where Perez, after Saudi, looked like, wow, I mean, if he's here to stay and he keeps putting in those performances.
Are you about to say this is the weekend where the wheels came off Checo Perez's championship
challenge?
Not
quite. I don't want to say it like that. I just wonder if this was one of those that we'll look back on in, say, 3 or 4 races' time, maybe for leaders' race.
No, it was never clarified. The team couldn't find anything wrong with the car.
Because I know Karun had a theory, didn't he? Where the engine, because we've seen that in the past, where you turn in and there's still a degree of throttle on, so it kind of pushes the car out.
They changed the brakes in Parc Ferme.
Okay.
If anything else, just to rule that out. So the brake material, calipers, and I don't think they changed calipers, but the pads and the discs. Because we get a list of everything that's changed in Parc Ferme. So they did change Checo's brakes and some other little things.
But Checo said straight away it was like, it's the same issue. It's not fixed. You've not fixed it.
But they couldn't find. They certainly didn't, which is why they didn't say publicly, yes, this is what we found after qualifying for Checo.
Which, if they haven't found it, that's pretty concerning.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
could just be one of those.
Well, I think each race so far, at least one of the drivers has complained of some sort of issue, like either particularly during the race in Saudi. I know Max was talking about the gear shifts and that. So again, that's the one kind of if you're looking for a multi-team championship fight, I think Red Bull's car and performance is so clear at the minute. But will the reliability bite them? Again, you could say it about any team. We had Lance, Mercedes powered car. Concat in Saudi, we had Russell, another Mercedes power, which Mercedes, that was their thing last year. It wasn't about ultimate performance, it was about consistently being up there, consistently finishing, consistently getting good points. And I think with Checo, he's blinding start to the season, of course. I think that it's maintaining that. Valtteri's talked about this when he was alongside Lewis. He'd win in Australia, he'd have a strong start to the season, but having that ability to go toe-to-toe with someone like Lewis Hamilton, and Checo's got this same challenge with Max now, to do that week in, week out and maintain a title fight it's a lot to ask. And I hope Checo can do it, because there's nothing more I'd love to see than a Checo championship fight. That would be phenomenal.
He'll win another race or two, but
I mean, Max Verstappen is just
said,
on a level.
Saudi, Forget about Saudi.
Yeah.
This is me.
Yeah.
Even with the koala, not a bear traps.
What I would also say is, despite, and this is great for the rest of the season, despite having a race that Verstappen won and Verstappen won at a canter, what an amazing weekend we had and what a competitive field we had. And there was so much of interest that happened across the race.
Well,
this is great.
Until Max dunked, 4/10 in qualifying on everyone else, the gaps in Q3 from the top 5 were within, 10th and a half, 2 tenths, whatever. Like, again, there's a lot to be... As much as, yes, Max Red Bull looks very ominous, looks very like it's going to be a walkaway season, potentially, it depends on how much, Aston Martin, it's up until June 30th. They've got all this ATR time, this 100% ATR Aston Martin have got relative to Red Bull. That's going to come down after then. Can they capitalise? Can they make the most of it? Because I know Red Bull have been quite vocal in that they're quite worried about how the other team's catching up. So they want to strike while the iron's hot now.
Yeah.
And I guess it's in their, of course they're going to do that. Do we think everyone's going to catch up by the end of the season? Maybe.
Could be, yeah.
But, I mean, Red Bull have to act like that, don't they?
Well,
they have to act like they're going to lose their advantage.
Yeah, but they had some
season.
nice upgrades this race. They had a new front wing, new front wing end plates, new rear brake ducts as well. But no, you're right, Matthew, because it was good to see McLaren get points because we were all very worried about them. They were the team most under pressure going into Melbourne. Sorry, are we going to do Melbourne? McLaren
No,
later,
please, yeah.
And Zach Brown did this big interview with Rachel about what's going wrong, and he made the good point. So, look, Saudi was compromised because of the front wing and front wing debris. Bahrain was compromised because of Lando with the air and Oscar with. He had an electronics problem, didn't he? It was a DNF.
Yeah, the wheel kept
and the wheel. Yeah. So that it was. They just needed a clean weekend, and McLaren got points. I thought that was critical for them. I thought it was good to see Zhou Guanyu get the first points for himself as well, and because Valtteri already has points, and to back up what you're saying, Tommo, all the teams have points now. Good points for Hulkenberg, even though Kevin Magnussen had already scored points for Haas, and so happy, as you say, to see Yuki get points as well because he's. Just needed that. I think should have been more. Should have probably got a point before he got taken off one in Saudi by Kevin Magnussen. So yeah, with Williams already having the points, yeah, it's quite rare for all of the teams to have scored points by only round 3.
Where's Statman when you need him?
Oh well, where are my emails?
So
go on.
Every team apart from Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri have got into Q3 in 3 races.
Oh yeah, wow.
It's only those 2 teams who haven't had a presence from at least one driver in Q3. So, yeah, again, that speaks to somewhat and again, yes, Red Bull are clear, but when you look at the rest of the field, I feel like there has been some degree of convergence. And look, for me, if we're going to talk, regulations, it was always going to be a big ask for after one season for the whole field to converge. I think it was always going to be something you have to wait 2 seasons. The historical, you've got all the historical kind of personnel talent as well as the money that Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, all the big teams had relative to the bottom teams. It's going to take time. The budget cap's not going to change that overnight. It's still giving a degree of merit to these teams. I think, Haas, for example, I think their pace is really good. Look at Gasly's pace in the race. He was right up there with, Carlos and Lance. It wasn't a mile off at all.
Yep.
Even Lando's pace was pretty good. So I think with your point on McLaren, Ted, it's like that Baku upgrade.
Yeah, that's the next race, of course. I'll tell you who will be happy about this weird sort of early term, half term, 4 weeks.
Spring break.
Yeah, spring break. Good
spring break.
And that's Alpine. There was some thought that both those cars were write-offs. The significant damage to the chassis.
That is an expensive.
It was very
expensive
to have 2 cars, and if we had a back-to-back race, Alpine would have been really up against it. Really. I mean, we never got close enough to have a look.
Yeah.
But it was remarked to me by a couple of other teams that they think that might have been 2 Alpine write-offs.
And just to explain
against the wall there,
how many spare parts and cars these teams have.
Well, they would have, so they'd have, for the first couple of races, they would have chassis 1 and chassis 2. They'd probably have chassis 0, which would have been the crash test chassis, or maybe they name it differently, as 1, 2, and 3. So they would have had 3 chassis, because 1 you have to do the crash test on, 2 you race. And one of those would have been the test car as well. And they would have been busy at this point building up chassis number 4, or 3, depending on how you number them. And then, so now, the Alpine will have to get that new chassis in, definitely, and then probably hope that either Gasly's or Ocon's isn't damaged beyond a sort of good chassis
And how
repair.
long does it take to build that? To build a chassis, as it were?
About a month.
Really? Wow.
Isn't it about $500,000? I've seen that number chucked around.
Oh yeah, no, you've got to put
Don't
everything
quote me on that,
together.
but
You
it's a
have to
lot,
put in amongst all of the tub. You've got to put all the metal bits for all the fixings and everything like that. I mean, it would have been in production because they'd know they would have needed another spare tub.
Yeah.
But so they'll need the 4 weeks definitely.
Yeah.
Alpine.
One team that had a really good weekend was Mercedes. And I think aside from the Russell fire that happened, you know, he was running really, really well, was going to have a good race. Hamilton was also leading the Grand Prix. And then the qualifying pace, P2 Russell, P3 Hamilton. Got a tweet here that says, do you think Mercedes' problems are a little overstated, or is their car really that unpredictable? 1 week they want to bin the concept, the next week they say they could have won the race. Could they have won the race?
Well, if Verstappen had dropped out, they could have won the race.
Yeah. Yeah.
True. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
No, I mean they're still 6/10 behind Red Bull.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think this is a product of Mercedes, and Mercedes being this, 8 constructors championships on the trot. They're not interested in being third or second. Being second, in the moment it's a win because of relative where they were looking at the start of the season. But if they're not fighting, if they're not on par with Red Bull, they're not going to be satisfied. So they're going to be unhappy with the car, and it doesn't. No one reflects in the history books. No one looks back at who finished second and third. It's not going to make a massive difference to a team like Mercedes. They're conditioned to win, and if they're not winning, then they're not going to be happy. So I don't think it's them personally. I don't think it's them blowing their problems out of proportion because they're still over half a second behind Red Bull. That is a problem.
And then look, I've just got my notes from qualifying where George said on the radio, "Hang on, I thought we were 1 second off the pace." And that was why I went to Toto. And the first question with Toto was a rather cheeky, "Oh, she's not such a bad car, then, is she?" Toto was like. I put myself in the. I have this romantic image that somewhere in Mercedes, there's the person who's in charge of W14 original concept, who's basically been whacked around the head with a wet fish by everybody else, saying, "I told you the concept was bad. We're going to go to a Red Bull RB19. Why did you make us do this?" And that person in Australia was saying, "Excuse me, still here. See, not bad, not such a bad car."
But it's all relative because they're still up in the top, the top four.
Exactly.
It's relative.
McLaren would kill for that car right now.
That's what I mean.
So-
It's relative to expectations. So it's bad by their standards, but it's still not. It's obviously not a bad car. It's just is it the right? Has it got the ceiling?
Indeed,
that the Red Bull has?
and also because they have this problem with the rear of the car, with rear grip, and Hamilton says he's not happy with the rear of the car. The characteristics of Melbourne penalise that much less than Bahrain or Saudi. And did you see Karun's piece at the Skypad where he did the thing about the seating position and where they are? Very good, explains it. That's been something they need to fix. And as soon as they can get the rear of the car sorted out, I mean, when they go to Spain or where else you need a strong rear of the car, what's the next race in Baku-ish? Then it might be a bit further back.
Just
and they
explain
won't
what you
be able
mean
to say.
by a strong rear of the car.
So when you turn in, that you're going to actually have some kind of load on the back and it's not going to get away from you and you'll constantly be having to catch it going in there. So Lewis isn't like Max where similar, but Max can turn in and then can judge it so perfectly on the throttle and on the steering wheel and everything else. Even if the back does step out a little bit, he can go off and power through and it's very quick. Checo likes a bit more understeer maybe, so the story goes. Lewis is a bit more precise and George as well with that car. And that Mercedes has worse rear grip than the Red Bull. So Red Bull's great, and as well as the Super Duper DRS, which gives Red Bull all of their pace at the moment. Lewis looks at that and says that car has got so much downforce that we just don't. The Mercedes doesn't. But it was penalised less at Melbourne than it will be at some other races.
Do you think the seating position thing is an example of when Lewis has said he didn't necessarily feel like the team listened to as much of his input as he'd have liked, and something like it because a driver's not an aerodynamicist. There's going to be limits to the input a driver can meaningfully have, but they are the one driving the car, and it feels like the seating position relative to the front axle is something that like a driver's feel, because Lewis has complained particularly about he feels like he's too far forward. Do you think that's one of those metrics where a driver's input needs to be considered more? Because then, if Lewis is talking about the underfloor, I doubt his input is going to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm not sure, because I did ask. Do you remember we did Development Corner at the beginning in testing, and our special guest for that was Mike Elliott.
Yeah.
And the piece didn't go quite as well as I'd hoped, because I had all these ideas about the Mercedes, and then I put them to Mike, and he said no, basically. And one of them was, I said, have you moved the cockpit forward? Because there was something online, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
We said the cockpit's moved forward. I said, have you moved the cockpit forward? He said no. I said, well, bang goes that theory then. And so I'm all a bit I'm a bit more confused. Yeah, I think we need to. I don't know.
Questions
to answer
answers.
your question, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's something Lewis can go and say, see, I told you we were too forward. And they said, well, you're no more forward than you were before. So, needs to be, that will come out in the fullness of time, I'm sure.
Yeah. And just a word on George out-qualifying Lewis in every race this season.
The gaps haven't been that big, though. I think you look 3-0 and you think, oh wow, but I think it's the gap. I mean, I know Hulkenberg's quite significantly outqualified Magnussen in terms of the actual deltas. So I don't think that. I mean, they are. You look last season, there was nothing in it between them in qualifying. I don't read too much into that. I don't think Lewis does either. Like, if the gap was significant, if it was 3, 4, 5 tenths. Okay, that's a different conversation, but I think Mercedes have got two drivers who are at a very similar level, and because they're not fighting at the front for a championship, I think all is well. If they were fighting for a championship, then that might be a bit different.
Yes, but Tommo, it's very reserved of you. You're not biting on Matthew's question. Matthew's question, he's basically asking you, wanting you to say that George Russell is a quicker driver than Lewis Hamilton. He wants you to say that. Are you not going to say it?
I'm not going to say
You're
it.
not going to say that.
I'm not going to say it.
I mean, that's what you're saying. Is George Russell a quicker driver than Lewis Hamilton in qualifying, which is when you measure these things?
Yeah, and last year, I think it was widely accepted that Lewis did a lot of the hard work on the car.
There were many reasons.
Yeah, there were many reasons why Lewis couldn't put the laps in that George could.
Yeah.
This year, is that still the case? We don't know.
Maybe he is. Maybe George Russell is a faster driver than Lewis Hamilton. Matthew, what do you think?
I think on the basis of this year and the first 3 races, it's inarguable that George is over one
was
lap
quicker in
this
qualifying.
Year.
But when the delta was that little,
that.
I don't think that's meaningful enough to.
And George doesn't feel this handling imbalance that Lewis does, or says that it doesn't affect him as much.
Yeah, because different.
He sounds a lot happier in the car.
Well, he is demonstrably is.
Yeah,
because they're not going to have identical driving. Like every driver's got a slightly different approach. Do you square off corners more? Do you carry more speed through? You smooth or whatever. But the fact that they're so close, I think that's the important thing. They're so close, and I think George has really stepped up into that team. And he's done a fantastic job.
Which is why we really, really want to see Mercedes challenging for the championship with Red Bull, because then we can get into championship challenging George Russell against championship challenging Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
And when they've actually got something to go for, because I don't know this for sure, but I imagine if I was Lewis Hamilton and I wasn't in for the championship, I've won so many. I'm like, well, I'm not going for the championship. If George beats me, I don't really care. And you could reflect on 2022 and say, George did beat him in the points. And he said, well, I wasn't in the championship. I don't care whether I'm 3rd or 4th or 5th if I'm not number 1. That's what I want to see. I want to see championship challenging Lewis Hamilton against championship challenging.
To get the absolute best out of Lewis, he has to be right at the very
we've
heart
seen
of
in
the
the we've seen in the past that Lewis takes a step up when he's challenging.
Yeah.
I've got a question though, Ted. Like when you look at points differences between teammates, and they never tell the full story. Like the context is so important, and that's why it's when you look at seasons past, you then over time you forget. Oh well, this driver DNF'd, or there was bad luck. Someone got taken out.
Yeah.
Within the paddock, is there that same emphasis that I think the broader fan base, because as the broader fan base, we working jobs, you can't fully consume F1. You're doing as much as you can, but I feel like points can be often used to as a baton to hit someone with, or like Nico Hulkenberg never getting a podium. That's often he's often hit with that, and I think unfairly, because when you look through the context of when he got close, some instances were his fault, some weren't. Some were just factors completely outside of your control. So it's when you're actually looking at driver performance, points don't tell the full story, and I feel like people in the paddock, I would have thought, understand that a bit more.
Yeah, they do, and people tend to have better memories, refreshed more often than from the drivers themselves, to say, "Oh, I remember my DNF in Melbourne when the engine went." And that's
was leading the race.
That's lost George.
Yeah.
Okay, red flag went against him, but He would have scored multiple points, wouldn't he?
Lance is on level points with Science, I think.
And Lance didn't score in Saudi.
And he was on for a possible P4 maybe there.
Yeah.
And again, all that, these will be forgotten. These, you see, you go on Wikipedia and you look at the results and you see like DNF, but like, what's the context of that? Was it their fault? Did they get taken out? We forget that over time. So
you mean you go on the skysports.com/F1 website and you see the
Very good. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for.
Good.
Yeah.
it's a shame.
I think we've done everyone.
I think we've done everyone.
Did Red enjoy the podcast? Did you enjoy the podcast there, mate? How about your little...
I'm not going to do an Australian accent. I've already done one today.
Have you? Okay.
Crikey, yes.
I think Red. That for me, Red and his little Joey is like...
Red Roo.
Yeah. Is like, I don't know, it's like Christian Horner and Max Verstappen in his match. He just made sure that nothing was going to detract them from winning in Melbourne. It was as safe as houses, wasn't it?
Yes.
No, it wasn't. But they avoided all the traps.
Also,
and they bounced to...
Glad we've got through without talking about Alex's crash tip, because Alex is my favourite. And
Alex Albon's your favourite?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was so gutted.
I know.
I was so gutted because
going in sixth.
Williams' best qualifying performance for many a year, P8, and I think he went wide corner before, didn't he? And they said he got a temperature spike. Yeah. And that's the racing driver excuse. I don't know if I'll buy that one or not. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all in all, I think though Williams, it's a good car.
Yeah,
it's not as nowhere near as off the pace as it has been in recent years. So
yeah,
happy.
Yeah. Before we go, plans for the spring break?
Well, you've got to do a podcast every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday, yes. We've got some exciting guests though.
Have you?
Coming on? Yeah,
okay,
I'm going to keep them under my hat or under Red's hat.
You don't want to tease the listeners?
Unconfirmed.
Okay,
just at this stage.
Okay, well, exciting yet unconfirmed.
But as soon as they're confirmed, we'll let you know.
Okay, I may or may not have a shoot with George Russell that I'm very excited about, but I'm not going to tell you what that shoot is.
This is great. This is incredibly cryptic from all of us.
I think I have a shoot with George Russell in the break, which I am beside myself with excitement.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Well, is this a good opportunity from like a broadcasting point of view to get shoots in for more evergreen content? Because we've got 5 races in 6 weeks.
6. Yeah.
Like you're not going to have any, because it's just going to be race by race by race. So this is the time to get the good stuff in.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you about it probably at Silverstone when I think the piece is going out. So to answer your question, Tommo, yes. We're giving him all the telly secrets today, aren't we? Hey?
Cash him in.
Yeah, cash him in.
It's a lovely studio.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Tommo. Appreciate your time. Actually, I was going to say one thing. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple, please, if you can, leave us a review. And there's been some very nice reviews, Ted, for your pod book.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sweet.
The pod book.
Some very nice reviews.
Yes, that's not going to happen every Thursday because I won't be able to tell you anything that I've done.
When you're at a race?
No, when we're at a race. Yeah, the idea behind that is briefly to essentially give you some sound effects of local flora, fauna, and public transportation. That's the idea behind it. Yeah. So in Bahrain, we had the
hotel pool.
The hotel pool and the singer doing some lovely cover versions of, I think it was Genesis songs. And we had the trams in Melbourne and the chaffinches and the kookaburras in the trees. And you have no idea how many times I had to try and record that little Ted's Podbook on the Thursday, waiting for the perfect tram to trundle by with a ding, ding. They've got this electronic bell, which sounds like an old tram bell. It's not an old tram. I think when you pass, they have a proper bell. And I must have started that about 50 times, waiting for the perfect... In the end,
often in TV, we're trying to avoid the background noise. You're very much wanting the background noise.
I wanted the background noise, yeah. So that's every Thursday of a race weekend, where we give you some of the little tidbits, little golden nuggets from the paddock on a Thursday and just set your weekend up ready. Yeah. Because something you realise when you're not at a race is that the Thursday and the Friday, people are still... still got jobs to do, still got work to go to.
Absolutely.
And for a lot of people, it begins on a Saturday with FP3. But we've already had the Thursday press conferences and the driver interviews and anything else that's around the place. And then you have Friday. So that's just to give a little taster on a Thursday and a Friday.
The pod book. Very good. Well, we will be back next Tuesday. We're going to try next Tuesday's episode, look back on the first 3 races, who's got the most work to do over the spring break. So hope you can join us then. But bye from Red.
And Ted.
And
Tommo.
And
ruined it, didn't I?
Ruined it. Bye for now.